2022, I will predict that Apple will release iOS 16 and that it will deprecate the IDFA and ban behavioral advertising.
Ban all behavioral advertising.
Well, only for third-party apps.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Reactions. Come on, Andy. Come on, Omer. You guys got to have a reaction to that one. That one's been sort of sitting out there for a while.
I'm afraid to say anything about this.
Understood.
I think there's some truth to it, potentially, and whether they go all the way, I don't know.
Interesting. I threw that one out there to be provocative. I'm not sure about it, but I do think we'll see interesting iOS 16 updates.
That is an interesting one, Stacey. I think it's a bold one, and I think it is interesting. Andy, over to you, number two.
I was going to make one related to advertising, so it's a good follow-up. It was that Google will further delay cookie deprecation. So actually, it doesn't cut against it, but it's just related. I think there's parts of the ecosystem that are not ready yet.
No kidding. And why are you saying just because folks aren't ready? They've delayed it once and they sort of staked out that they're absolutely not delaying again?
I think I'd like to hear from the group, but the more things change, the more things stay the same with cookies. You know, we've had this conversation with lots of different people, and I'll believe cookies are dead when they're truly, actually, really, finally, totally dead. And I just don't see that yet. Because at the end of the day, it is a device identifier. It isn't, you know, we can talk about the GDPR and how the GDPR brought different kinds of data into the definition of personal data, but at the end of the day, it is a device ID. It isn't personal in the same way.
That's an interesting. Anybody want to jump in on this one? Do you have any other views? Okay, over to Jocelyn.
So I think there's going to be more churn in the EU between the e-privacy directive, which is hopefully will be a regulation at some point, all the market and digital services, and especially the Data Governance Act, where I think that Omar also flagged something that is causing me some agita, where the data transfer mechanism for that will be for non-PII in a very similar way, where there's going to be adequacy needs, and then the AI regulation. So I think there's going to be lots of other swirl there over the next year that we're still trying to flesh out and what that will mean.
Okay, you have to tell me what swirl is. Swirl is defined as proposed, adopted.
I think the data governance one is moving ahead. You know, I think it looks like the e-privacy regulation is moving ahead. I think I'd like to hear what Omer thinks about the AI regulation, but it's getting a lot of traction, making companies nervous in the United States. So I think not, taking away GDPR, there's a lot to think about there and a lot of impact extraterritorially on the US.
Okay, that's an interesting one. Reactions from anybody?
Yeah, I think there is just, an incredible tsunami of tech regulation in Europe, kind of coming into focus with DGA. Surprisingly, was the first to the goal. I think now it's in final form. All three institutions agreed on a text. And then the DMA, DSA, the AI Act, the Data Act, and maybe the e-privacy reg. And there are actually a few others focused on identity, and the NIST directive too, and others. So definitely interesting times in Brussels. And China too has been incredibly active on the tech regulation front, with almost tit for tat with Europe. Europe has DMA, China has like a competition authority sort of regulation of platforms. There's platform regulation, PIPL, of course, now data security, data transfers, AI, smart cars even. So yeah.
largest trading partner, isn't China, with the EU? So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll let Omer give one, and then I actually have a question. Go ahead, Omer. What's your prediction?
So my next one, that's really a prediction. I don't know anything. I have no background information. And the worst thing is that I may be wrong, and I may be proven wrong within a couple of weeks. But I'm going to say that Israel is going to be the first country to lose its adequacy decision. I think the European Commission is imminently going to issue its determination. As you know, Israel was deemed adequate about a decade ago. At the time, I actually worked with the government on the application. We made certain commitments that we haven't delivered on. And, you know, the requirements were also tightened via Schrems 1 and Schrems 2. So I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that Israel will be the first country to lose its adequacy.
Is there a triggering or sort of a focus triggering events that you're seeing? Is it changes in law in Israel? What are the things that you think are leading to that, Omer?
Well, so the first trigger is the change of the law in Europe, actually. When we negotiated adequacy, the whole government access issue wasn't, I'd say, even considered, certainly not front and center like it is today. And as you know, much like the United States, Israel has a very robust national security apparatus where these issues do come up. The other thing I would say is that we made some commitments at the time that Israel would improve its laws, and they just haven't come to fruition yet. Interestingly, just in the past few weeks, maybe as a result of some kind of pressure behind the scenes, the Israeli government, but not parliament yet, passed amending legislation. It still needs to go through in parliament. But even that isn't in full compliance with the obligations at the time. So I think these are the main reasons.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, that's a bold prediction. Any other reactions to that one from anybody else? That would obviously be a very big deal, and it'd be a big deal because, you know, there've been so many discussions from Europe that, if you look at it from the US perspective, not the European perspective, but it looks like a lot of the focus out of Europe is on criticizing the US, and for it to at least become a more multilateral set of issues in terms of withdrawing adequacy would be interesting, I think, you know, and certainly if that were the basis.
I would only argue, though, that US and Canada have lost some of their adequacy findings too, with Privacy Shield and then the PNR agreement with Canada. So Israel probably wouldn't be the first. Those are our adequacy, our piecemeal adequacy findings.
Right. But they weren't on the whole country regime, right? I mean, it was.
We couldn't get it, so both of us had it based on, you know, functional adequacy.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Well, my second prediction is that California will be the first state to be declared adequate under the EU policy. And here's my logic. And they're not going to be, they won't complete the finding in 2022, but here's how we get there. You can be a region and be found adequate. It doesn't need to be a country. I have confidence that the Europeans and the US are going to reach a new privacy shield so that we'll have an adequacy finding as to the US and an adequacy finding as to a US EU transfer mechanism will enable California to seek adequacy, because the national security issues will not be on the table. And I think California will have a very strong argument between CCPA and CPRA that they're an adequate regime. That's my argument. So